Okay, now we're going to begin Lesson 2, Intro to Music Theory. If you've already looked at the previous lesson, if you've gotten to watch that one, then you've already learned about landmarks on the keyboard. So you already learned about C4 being middle C. You learned about how to find C and F on the keyboard, and then subsequently how to find other notes of the keyboard. We're not going to ever really review since these are findable on YouTube. So instead, I'm just going to proceed with some new information. We're going to start off today's lesson by talking about the black notes on the keyboard. When we go back and we look at music theory, and specifically this is European music history, we can listen to what's called Gregorian Chant. And that was based off of modes being the main language of music. It was 7 specific scales, all based off of different notes that you can see right here on the piano. This is all before the piano existed. This goes back to Greek music theory, the idea of 7 modes all corresponding with a different starting note, and it was all kind of complicated to explain on stream, but what it ended up in, the result was that we had in the Middle Ages, church music. That's where the beginning of modern Western music theory began. And it was all based off the idea of the 7-note scale, and that there would be 7 different notes that you could start on. So if A through G is a 7-note scale, well, so is B through A, so is C through B. And this became known as diatonic scales. Now we sort of consider it to be an 8-note scale because we consider the last note of the scale to be the octave of the starting note. When I say diatonic scale, I do mean a 7 or 8-note scale depending on your interpretation of the terminology. A to A is an A scale of varying types depending on how I alter it. So as we're moving through the Middle Ages, we are just using what become known on the keyboard as the white notes. We're using a very specific combination of notes that have different spacings between them, different distances, and I haven't taught you the musical term for that yet. It's not relevant to today's lecture. But eventually, there was a problem. That interval right there we're going to learn about in the future is called the tritone. So we're going to our Google Doc real quick. We're going to type up everything I just said, and then the video is going to cut right now. All right, we're done typing. So let's check this out, shall we? Everything we just talked about, plus a little bit more information, talking about medieval music theory. Music is developed in different parts of the world in different ways. The study of music theory is predominantly focused on the history of Western music or European tradition. Western music theory draws its root from Greek music theory. 8-note scales, the first and last note is the same because there's only 7 alphabet letters in music. This is the beginning of what we call the diatonic scale. Some people call it a 7-note scale, others call it an 8-note scale because you're not done with the scale until you get back to the starting note on the way up. Each scale was different because of the distances between the notes. We will talk about that in a second. Medieval music borrowed the idea of this diatonic scale. There are 7 diatonic scales because there are 7 alphabet letters. You can see the spatial relationships between the different alphabet letters on the keyboard. If you look at the keyboard, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, most white notes have a black note between them. If you look at the keyboard, you can see that most white notes have a black note in between them. This causes a certain distance between most white notes, a larger gap than what would normally be there. As in the case of B to C, E to F, there's no gap there that has the black note, so the gap is actually smaller, the distance is smaller, and that causes a different sound. So real quick, listen to F to G, G to A to B. It's a very wide open sound. Listen to B to C. Now compare that to A to B and C to D. It's more wide open. B to C, E to F. It's a very crunchy sound. It's closer together. So we will not be focusing on the different modes today. that is actually kind of far in the future to get into specifics. The main thing to understand is that the varying distances between the notes cause different sounds, and that this is the beginning of the concept of white notes on the keyboard, because that was the basis for medieval music theory. The use of these 7 diatonic scales, which were known as the Gregorian modes, is called Gregorian Chant. And those are just some fun facts that I wanted to share with you, because it's the beginning of understanding where the black notes came from. There was a certain sound called the tritone between the notes of F and B that was considered unholy in medieval music. It's a very interesting, unique sound. It was known as the devil's interval. Interval is a distance, and we'll talk more about that when we start talking about intervals, because we do deal with the tritone in music theory. But to avoid the sound that was known as the devil's interval, the unholy sound, there was a performance practice of the time that would either slightly raise the F or slightly lower the B. It would change the size of the interval to be either larger or smaller depending on where we were in the interval. But this was called musica ficta, fake music, which was eventually put into written music instead of just assumed, okay, my performer will know to employ the practice of musica ficta, I might as well just put it in the music. First, it was an editorial practice, and then it eventually just was a thing composers would do. If you're writing a piece of music and you want them to use musica ficta, you would write it into there yourself rather than rely on an editor to do it. When an editor would indicate musica ficta, you would end up with a symbol above the note, and now, as a result of composers employing the practice, we actually put it in the staff next to the note. So what we're talking about is the use of sharps and flats. So in musica ficta, if I raise an F, it results in F sharp. And if I lower a B, it results in B flat. The symbol of the flat before a written note indicates you should lower the white note 1 degree. That does not mean if I've already got a flat and I put another flat that I lower the note another step. What we're talking about with sharps and flats is that we are either raising or lowering, we are altering a white note. If I have a symbol of D sharp, all I'm doing is raising a D white note up to the black note above it, because what I said was raise it 1 degree. So a G flat would be take a G white note and go down 1 degree. So that's the nearest note, is that right there, that black note. Now there's some other odd things about this that we'll talk about in a future lesson. I just want you to understand the concept here. So then when you're looking at your piano time or other app that helps you look at the keyboard and understand the interspatial relationships, and then you get to play little ditties on there, then you'll understand that the sharp and the flat symbols indicate raising or lowering a white note to usually a black note. So that is the first half of today's lesson. So now I'm going to type a little bit about the bass clef. Okay, the bass clef indicates notes in a lower register. I had to explain, in last lecture that treble means high, for those of you who don't mess with your stereos very often. I don't think I need to explain that bass means low, so just pretend I didn't. The clef symbol wraps around the 4th line. That note is F3. So let's pull up Sibelius. Right here, this note is F3, and this is the bass staff with the bass clef. You see right here that the clef symbol right here wraps around the 4th line, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you put dots on either side of it, and that note is F3. So we're going to do the same thing we did with last lesson with the treble clef. I'm just going to name notes for you. This is G, B, D, F, A. What I want you to notice is, just like with the treble clef, because we follow the same rules, we're going to be skipping notes in our alphabet in order to say what the lines are. So we're skipping A, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A. So G, B, D, F, A. So let's create text, lyrics, line 2. Good boys do fine always. It's not true, but it's the acronym we're going with. Now let's take care of the spaces. So a note above G, I'm pointing for some reason. The note above G is A. A, C, E, G. All cows eat grass. I like to say all cars eat gas, but you never know what technology will do in the coming years, so it could end up, incorrect at some point. Now that we've done that, I'm going to play this for you so you can hear the spatial relationships. And now it's time for the homework assignment. So we go back to the Google Doc. What we talked about is the 5 lines of the bass clef. Bottom to top are G, B, D, F, A. Good boys does. Oh yeah, I copied and pasted. Good boys do fine always. 4 spaces, bottom to top. A, C, E, G. All cows eat grass. You may notice a similarity to the treble clef, meaning that many of the same notes located on the lines and spaces. G, B, D, F are on lines in both the bass and treble clef. Now there are space G's, space B's, space D's, space F's, such as the F that begins the spaces on the treble clef, but inside the actual staffs, there are certain notes that you can expect to be lines and certain notes you can expect to be spaces, such as this ACE here was part of FACE on the treble clef. So now for your homework, I want you to, just like before, write all the notes of the bass staff in order, meaning you need to have some staff paper that looks like this, and I need you to do all of them. G, A, B, C, D, and don't stop till you've reached the top line of the staff. So G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, and practice that until you can really get used to those specific notes. Note that that's only 9 notes per staff that we've learned, and there are 88. If we figure in the fact that there are black notes for every white notes, 2 of them, the sharp and the flat, that eliminates some of it, but you still have a lot of white notes we haven't covered. That will be for next week. So send your homework to me on Twitter at Joseph_Dunlap. I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks for coming to this lecture, and continue learning.